My name is Franklin Boyd, and I'm 67 years old. If you're sitting down somewhere quiet right now, I'd like you to stay there. Pour yourself a coffee, or whatever you drink in the evening, because I'm about to tell you something that took me almost a year to be able to say out loud. This is a story about my father, the man who taught me how to tie a fishing knot when I was 6 years old. It's about my son's wife, a woman I welcomed into our family with open arms 11 years ago. And it's about what I found on a memory card on a Tuesday morning in March that I will carry with me until the day I die. I'm a retired plumber from Joplin, Missouri. 41 years I ran my own shop, Boyd & Son Plumbing, on the corner of 26th and Connor. The & Son part was always a hope more than a fact. My boy Daniel went into accounting instead, and I let him, because that's what you do. You let your kids be who they're going to be. He works for an insurance firm in Springfield now, about an hour and a half east of me. Married a woman named Brittany about 11 years back. Sweet smile, firm handshake, the kind of woman who remembers your birthday and brings a casserole when somebody's sick. They've got 2 little girls, Emma and Sophie, 8 and 5. Those girls are the brightest thing in my life. My wife Linda passed in 2019. Pancreatic cancer, 8 months from diagnosis to the funeral. I won't talk about that part. Not tonight. What you need to know is that after Linda was gone, my father became the only person left from the world I grew up in. My dad, Walter Boyd, 89 years old this past January. A man who fought in Korea, drove a milk truck for 30 years, and once chased a copperhead out from under our porch with a garden rake when I was 9 years old. My mother passed back in 2007. Dad lived alone in that same little ranch house in Webb City for 17 years after that. Stubborn as a mule, refusing every offer of help. But about 2 years ago, things started slipping. He left the burner on and scorched a kettle so badly the smoke detector finally got him to call me. He fell in the bathroom and lay there 4 hours before a neighbor heard him knocking on the wall. The doctor at the VA used the word moderate cognitive impairment. Not full dementia, not yet, but headed there. He still knew who I was, still told the same Korea stories he'd been telling since 1972. He just couldn't be trusted alone with a stove or a bathtub anymore. I tried hiring help. 2 different home aides quit inside 3 weeks. Dad called the second one a bossy little thing and locked her out of the house. So I sat at my kitchen table one Saturday morning with a yellow legal pad and a cup of coffee, and I made my decision. I called Daniel. "Son," I said, "I'm bringing your grandfather here to live with me." Daniel was quiet on the line for a second. Then he said, "Dad, that's a lot. You're 67, you just lost Mom. Are you sure?" "I'm sure. What about Brittany and me taking him? We've got the spare bedroom downstairs. The girls would love it. Brittany already brought it up, actually. She said it's the right thing." I stopped. I hadn't expected that. She said that? She did, last week. Said Grandpa Walt deserves family around him, not just his son rattling around in a big house. Something warmed in my chest. I'd always liked Brittany, but I'll admit, I'd never quite felt close to her. She was always polite, always smiling, but a little bit far away, you know what I mean? Like there was a pane of glass between us. Hearing this, though, it felt like maybe that glass had finally come down. "Daniel, that's a lot to ask of you both. Your father-in-law moving in. The girls. Brittany's job. It's not asking, Dad. It's offering. Come down this weekend. Let's talk it through with Brittany." So I drove down. We sat at their kitchen table with sweet tea, and Brittany made a pot roast that fell apart at the touch of a fork. She held my hand across the table and said, "Frank, I know what it's like to lose a parent. My mom passed when I was 23. If I can give your dad a soft place to land, I want to. Let me. Please." I cried that night in their guest bedroom. First time I'd really cried since Linda's funeral. I felt so lucky. I really did. We moved Dad in the first week of February. He had his own room downstairs, the one Daniel mentioned, with a private bathroom and a window that looked out at a magnolia tree. Brittany hung a print of the Ozark Hills on the wall because she remembered Dad telling a story about fishing the Current River with his father in 1944. She thought of details I never would have thought of. Daniel handled the paperwork side, the VA transfers, the Medicare stuff. I drove down every Sunday to have lunch with him. Take Dad out for a drive, see my granddaughters. The first 3 weeks were good. Dad seemed steadier. He'd sit on the back porch with a cup of decaf and tell Emma about Korea. And that little girl would listen like he was reading from a storybook. Brittany sent me texts with pictures. Walt and Sophie at the kitchen table doing a puzzle, Walt napping on the couch with the cat asleep on his chest, Walt smiling at his birthday cake with all 89 candles lit, even though we were terrified the smoke alarm was going to go off. Then around the second week of March, something shifted. I drove down on a Sunday like always. Daniel met me at the door, and right away, I noticed his face was tired. He hugged me, and his hug felt heavy. You know what I mean? Like he was holding something he didn't want to set down. Dad was on the couch in the living room, and that was the first thing that hit me wrong. Dad was always in the kitchen at noon, helping Brittany set the table, peeling carrots, just trying to be useful. That was him. He'd been doing chores his whole life, and he wasn't going to stop just because his hands shook. But that day, he was just sitting there, folded into himself, like he'd shrunk a size. "Dad," I said, sitting down next to him. "How you doing, old man?" He looked at me, and I'll never forget this. His eyes filled up. Just filled. He didn't say a word. He just patted my knee and looked away. I wrote it off. I told myself it was the dementia. That's all. They get emotional. They get foggy. The doctor had warned me. But something in my chest didn't sit right the whole drive home that night. The next Sunday, he was worse. He'd lost weight. His shirt hung loose on his shoulders. When Brittany came into the room to ask if anybody wanted more sweet tea, Dad's whole body went still. Not afraid exactly. More like a deer that hears something in the brush and just stops. Stops breathing, stops blinking. I noticed it because my whole life I'd watched my father, and I knew every shape his body could take. This was new. After lunch, I asked Brittany how he was sleeping. She gave me a sad look and said, "Frank, he wanders at night. He gets confused. We've had to lock the front door deadbolt and keep the key on a hook he can't reach. The doctor said it's the dementia progressing. I'm so sorry, honey. I know this is hard to hear." She squeezed my arm. Her eyes looked wet. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my son's wife. She was the woman who hung the Ozark print. 2 Sundays later, Dad had a bandage on his cheek. Just a small square of gauze taped under his right eye. When I asked, Brittany came in fast from the kitchen and answered before Dad could open his mouth. "He had a little fall in the bathroom Tuesday morning," she said. "I was right there. I caught him before he hit the tile, but his cheek scraped the edge of the counter. I cleaned it up. I almost took him to urgent care, but it really wasn't deep." Dad just nodded, slow, looking at his lap. I went into the bathroom while Brittany was washing dishes. I looked at the counter. The edges were rounded laminate, not sharp, not the kind of edge that scrapes a thumbprint-sized square off an old man's cheekbone. I told myself I was being a paranoid old fool. I told myself plumbing had made me too suspicious of how people patch things. I drove home that night and I sat in my truck in the driveway for about 20 minutes before I went inside. I just sat there with my hands on the wheel. The thing is, I'd taught my son something my own father taught me. When something feels wrong, listen to that feeling. Don't talk yourself out of it. Don't be polite. Just listen. The next Friday, I drove down without telling anybody. I told myself I just wanted to surprise the granddaughters. That was the lie I told myself anyway. I knew. Some part of me already knew. I got there at about 11 in the morning. Brittany's car was in the driveway. Daniel was at work. The girls were at school. I rang the doorbell and Brittany opened the door, and for 1/2 second before her face rearranged itself into a smile, I saw something else there. Annoyance. Sharp annoyance. Like I was a salesman she was going to have to be polite to. "Frank, you should have called. I would have made lunch. Just thought I'd pop down and see Dad. He's napping, hon. He had a rough night. Come in, I'll put on coffee." I sat at the kitchen table and watched her move around. She was friendly. She was warm. She told me a funny story about Sophie and a frog the girl had brought home in her backpack. But I watched her hands, watched how her smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she set the cup down in front of me. There was a tightness around her mouth I'd never noticed before. Mind if I just peek in on him? I asked. Oh, let him sleep, Frank. He's exhausted. He'll be up in an hour, and you can have all the time in the world. I went down the hall anyway. She didn't stop me, but she followed close behind. Dad's door was closed. I opened it slowly. He was in bed, on his back, mouth open, sleeping deep enough that his breathing was a little ragged. The room smelled stale. There was a glass of water on the nightstand, and an orange prescription bottle next to it I didn't recognize. I closed the door quietly and turned to Brittany and asked, "What's that bottle on his nightstand?" She blinked. Just a flicker. Then the smile came back. Trazodone. The doctor prescribed it last month for sleep. I told you, didn't I, Friar? He prescribed it last month for sleep. I told you, didn't I? Maybe I forgot. Sorry, Frank, the days run together. I didn't remember her telling me anything of the kind. I drove home that afternoon, and I couldn't eat dinner. I sat in front of the TV with a cold sandwich, and I thought about my father. I thought about him pulling me out of the deep end of the city pool when I was 4 years old and didn't know how to swim. I thought about him fixing my bicycle chain 100 times. I thought about the way he'd gripped my shoulder at Linda's funeral and not let go for a full minute, just stood there, holding me up. The next morning, I drove to a Best Buy in Springfield and bought a small surveillance camera. The kid behind the counter was maybe 22, and he showed me 3 options. I picked the one that ran on its own battery, recorded to an internal card, had decent night vision, and was the size of a domino. $179. I paid cash. I sat in the parking lot reading the instructions for an hour. Then I drove to my son's house. Brittany's car wasn't there. She had book club on Saturdays from 1 to 4. Daniel was at home with the girls in the backyard. I rang the doorbell, hugged my son, told him I just wanted to sit with Dad for a while. Daniel waved me through. He was watching the girls on the swing set. I went down the hall to Dad's room. Dad was awake. He smiled when he saw me. That real smile, the one that scrunches up the corners of his eyes. I sat on the edge of his bed and I asked him, very quiet, "Dad, how are things really? You can tell me." He looked at me and his lower lip trembled, and then he shook his head. Just shook it. He couldn't get the words out. I don't know if it was the dementia or fear or both, but he reached out and grabbed my hand with surprising strength, and he just held it. I stood up and I looked around that room. There was a bookshelf next to his closet with a couple of his old paperbacks on it and a framed picture of him and my mother from 1968. I moved that picture forward about 2 inches, and I tucked the camera behind it, angled toward the bed and the door. I switched it on and set it to motion activated. The lens was the size of a pencil eraser. You'd never see it unless you knew. I stayed for another hour, watched a baseball game on the little TV in his room, held his hand for some of it. When I left, I told him I'd see him soon, and I kissed the top of his head, which I hadn't done since I was about 10 years old, and stopped letting him kiss me on the head. I went home. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling thinking about a man and his father and what a man owes his father. Tuesday morning I drove back down. I had told them I was bringing some old fishing tackle for Daniel. I'd been meaning to give him. Brittany was at work. Dad was watching the news in his room. I made small talk for 10 minutes, then said I had to use the restroom, slipped into Dad's room, and pulled the camera. He watched me do it. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, and his eyes were wet, and he gave the smallest nod you ever saw. I drove home with that camera in my coat pocket like it weighed 40 pounds. I sat at my kitchen table. I made myself a cup of coffee that I never drank. I plugged the memory card into my laptop. There were 11 recorded clips. The first one was from Saturday afternoon, just Brittany coming in to check on Dad, fluffing his pillow, leaving. Normal. The second one was Saturday evening, Daniel coming in to say goodnight, also normal. I started to feel foolish. I started to think maybe I was the crazy old man and Brittany was right and it was all just dementia. and I'd violated my son's home for nothing. The third clip was from 1:47 a.m. Sunday morning. The door opened. Brittany came in. She was in pajamas. She walked to the bed, and she stood there looking down at my father for a long moment, and then she leaned over, and she shook his shoulder. Hard. Not the way you wake up a child. The way you shake something you're frustrated with. Dad jolted awake, confused. He tried to sit up. She put her hand on his chest and pushed him back down. The audio on that camera wasn't perfect, but I could hear her voice. Low, sharp, hissing. You wet the bed again, Walter. Again. I just changed those sheets 2 days ago. He started to apologize. He was crying, 89 years old and crying like a little boy. She told him, and I'm not going to repeat all of it because some of it I can't say, but she told him he was disgusting. She told him he was ruining her life. She told him Daniel didn't really want him there, that they'd only taken him in because of the money. She said the word money. She told him, if he told anyone, if he said one word to me or to Daniel, she would have him put in the worst nursing home in Southwest Missouri, and nobody would ever come visit him again. Then she pinched his upper arm, hard, twisting. He made a sound I have never heard my father make in 67 years of life. She left the room. 6 minutes, that whole thing. 6 minutes. I watched the next clip. It was Sunday night, around midnight. Same routine. This time she made him take a pill. He didn't want to. She held his jaw and forced it. The trazodone, I'm guessing, although I don't know for sure what was in that bottle. He swallowed. He cried. The fourth clip. Monday, 2 a.m. She came in, and she just stood over him and said cruel things for 4 minutes. Just stood there, saying them. About Mom, about me, about Daniel, calling Dad a burden, a leech, a disgusting old man, telling him the only reason she was nice to him during the day was so I'd put her in my will. I had to stop watching. I went into the bathroom and I threw up. I want you to understand something. I did not watch the rest of those clips for evidence. I had enough on the first one to put her in handcuffs. I am not the man in some of those stories who lets the abuse keep going to build a case. I'm telling you this because I don't want anybody hearing my voice and thinking that's what a father does. But I also did not call the police that morning. Here is what I did instead, and I want to explain why. I called my lawyer. Her name is Patricia Halloran. She's been doing my business and estate work for 20 years. I told her everything. I told her what was on the camera. I told her what was on the camera. I told her my son did not know. I told her my granddaughters were in that house. Patricia was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Frank, listen to me very carefully. The first thing that happens is your father needs to be physically out of that house today. Today, Frank. Drive down right now. Make any excuse you have to. Get him in your truck and bring him to your home. Then we call Adult Protective Services and the Joplin police together from my office tomorrow morning. We do not call from your son's house. We do not give her a chance to destroy that camera footage or claim you fabricated it. Do you understand me? Yes. And Frank, one more thing. Your son is going to be devastated. You are going to want to tell him gently. You are going to want to wait. Don't. He needs to know today. Before she does, the minute she figures out the camera was there, she will get to him first with a story. I called Daniel from the road. I told him I was driving down. I told him I needed him to meet me at home, not at his office. He could tell from my voice it was bad. He didn't ask. He just said okay. I got there 4 in the afternoon. Brittany was still at work. The girls were at after-school care until 5:30. Daniel met me at the door, and I looked at my son's face. That face I'd watched grow from a baby's face, into a teenager's face, into a man's face, and I felt something in me break that I don't think will ever fully heal. I sat him down in his living room. I opened my laptop. I told him I needed him to watch something, and I needed him to not say anything until it was over. I played the first clip. He watched. His mouth opened. His hands started shaking. By the end of it, he was making a sound. And I'm not going to describe that sound because it's his sound and it belongs to him. When it ended, he stood up and he walked to the kitchen. And he stood at the sink with his hands on the counter and his back to me. And he didn't move for about 2 minutes. I let him have those 2 minutes. Then he turned around. His face was wet. His eyes were red. But his voice, when it came, was the steadiest I have ever heard it. Get Grandpa. Get him in your truck. I'll pack a bag for him. We're going to your house right now. The girls are coming with us. I'll text the school they're being picked up early. Daniel's son, Brittany will be home in an hour. I know. What are you going to do? He looked at me and for a second I saw my father in his face. The same set of jaw. The same iron in the eyes. I'm going to be sitting here when she walks in the door, with the laptop on the kitchen table, and the police are going to be in the driveway. Patricia already called me, Dad. While you were driving down, she told me what to do. I hadn't known Patricia called him, but I should have. Patricia Halloran is good at her job. I got Dad. Dad started crying when he saw me, and then he saw the bag Daniel was packing, and he understood, and he reached for my hand, and he held it the whole walk to the truck. Daniel got the girls in their car seats. We drove in 2 vehicles, me with Dad and the girls behind me with their father, an hour and a half north back to Joplin. Brittany was arrested at 6:40 p.m. that evening. 2 officers from the Springfield police, both women, came to the house. Patricia had already filed an emergency report and forwarded the camera footage. Brittany tried to laugh it off. Then she got angry. Then she tried to call her sister. None of it mattered. The footage was the footage. She was charged with elder abuse, assault on a vulnerable adult, and unlawful administration of a prescription medication. Missouri takes those charges seriously. She spent that night in jail. Her bail the next morning was set at $50,000. Her sister put up the property bond. The trial was a thing I will not describe in detail because my son is still healing, and so is my father. It took 8 months to get to court. Brittany's defense lawyer tried to argue that the footage was a violation of her privacy in her own home. The judge, an older woman named Honorable Vivian Thatcher, looked at that lawyer over her glasses and said, "Counsel, your client has no reasonable expectation of privacy while committing a felony in another adult's bedroom." That was the end of that argument. The jury watched 2 of the 11 clips. The prosecutor, a young man with a kind face named Adam Coltrane, didn't even need the rest. The jury was out for 40 minutes. Guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 6 years in the Missouri Department of Corrections, with the possibility of parole after 3. She is currently serving that sentence at the Vandalia Women's Correctional Center. My son filed for divorce the day after her arrest. It was finalized while she was awaiting trial. He has full custody of Emma and Sophie. Brittany is entitled to supervised phone calls with the girls, but she has not requested any, and Daniel says if she ever does, he will fight it in family court and his daughters will decide for themselves when they are older. Dad lives with me now. We turned the den into a bedroom for him on the first floor so he doesn't have to do stairs. A homemaid named Roberta comes Monday through Friday from 9 to 3. She's wonderful with Dad. He calls her the boss, which is the highest compliment he gives anybody. Daniel and the girls moved to Joplin 3 months ago. They live 4 blocks away. Daniel transferred to his firm's smaller branch up here. Took a pay cut to do it. He says it was the best decision he ever made. Emma and Sophie ride their bikes over to my house most afternoons. Sophie has decided she is going to be a plumber when she grows up. Dad tells her about Korea. She tells him about her stuffed animals. They are best friends. It has been almost a year since that Tuesday morning. Some nights, I still can't sleep. I'll sit on the porch with a cup of decaf, and I'll think about all those Sundays I drove down and didn't see what was right in front of me. I'll think about every smile of Brittany's I took at face value. I'll think about how my father slept in that house for almost 2 months, while she did what she did. I will carry that, friends. I will carry that for the rest of my life. But I'll also tell you this. I'd like you to hear it. A few weeks ago, my father had a clear evening, one of those evenings where the fog lifts and he's all the way back. He was sitting on my porch swing. I sat down next to him. Neither of us said anything for a long while. Then he said, "Frankie, you came and got me. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded." He said, "You always were a good listener, even when you were a little fella." That was all he said. He took my hand and he held it. The same hand that pulled me out of the deep end when I was 4. The same hand that gripped my shoulder at Linda's funeral. The same hand that for almost 2 months last winter was being twisted and bruised in the dark of a room I had helped him move into. If you are listening to this, I need you to hear something. If something feels wrong about how an older person in your life is being treated, listen to that feeling. Do not be polite. Do not assume the people around them are who you think they are. Ask the questions. Go down on a Tuesday when you said you'd come on a Sunday. Look behind the bandage. Look at the prescription bottle. Look at the eyes of the person you love and ask them, when nobody else is in the room, "Are you okay?" And if your gut tells you they are not okay, you act. Adult Protective Services exists in every state in this country. The number is 1-800-677-1100. You do not have to be related to make a report. You do not have to have proof. You just have to have a concern. They take it from there. My father is safe tonight. He is in the room down the hall, and he is sleeping with the door open the way he likes, with the hall light on, and the house is quiet, and nobody is hurting him. That is all I ever wanted in this life. And that is what I have. Because somewhere inside me, a quiet voice that sounded a lot like my father's own voice told me to listen, and I did. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. Hug somebody who needs you. And for God's sake, if your gut is talking to you about somebody you love, don't you dare ignore it. Good night from Joplin. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that Tuesday morning in March. Plumbing teaches you to follow the water back to the leak. You don't fix what's wet. You fix what's broken upstream. And when I sit on my porch at night now, with my father sleeping safe in the room down the hall, I trace the line backwards through everything that happened, and I see how every choice mattered. Brittany did not become cruel overnight. Cruelty is something a person practices in private, in small ways, long before the rest of us see it. By the time her hands were on my father's arm in the dark, she had already convinced herself, somewhere in the quiet places of her own mind, that her comfort was worth more than another human being's dignity. That is the seed, and once you plant that seed and water it, what grows from it is exactly what grew in her. There is a hard truth in that, and the truth is this. The choices we make about how we treat the people who can't fight back become the people we are. Nobody escapes that math, but I want to talk about the other side of it too. Because Daniel could have refused to watch that video. He could have begged me to wait, to think it over, to give Brittany a chance to explain. A weaker man would have. Instead, my son stood up at his kitchen sink and he turned around and he did the hardest thing a person can do, which is to choose the truth over the life he had built. That cost him his marriage. It cost his daughters their mother in the home. And he did it anyway. That is not a small thing. That is the kind of strength a man builds inside himself, one decision at a time, over a lifetime, until the moment finally comes when he needs every ounce of it. And I want to be honest about myself. I almost didn't listen to my own gut. I almost talked myself out of it 3 different Sundays. The thing that saved my father wasn't my cleverness. It wasn't the camera. It was a small voice inside me that I have been training to listen to my whole life. And I trained it by listening to it about little things first. About a tenant who seemed off. About a contractor whose numbers didn't add up. About a friend who needed a phone call. The reason that voice was loud enough to hear in March was because I had not been silencing it for 67 years. Wisdom is just the habit of paying attention, practiced over decades, until it gets sharp enough to save somebody you love. So if you're listening, here is what I want you to take with you. Be the kind of person whose private behavior matches their public face, because the gap between those two becomes who you are. Train your gut on small things so it works on the big ones. And when the moment comes, like it came for my Daniel, choose the hard right over the easy wrong, even when it costs you everything. Because the people who can't speak for themselves are counting on you to be that kind of person before you ever know they need you.